My name is Scott Kloetzer, and I'm with LJ Star Incorporated, and I'm with my colleague, John Giordano, to discuss sight glasses, applications, and try and answer some of the questions that some of our customers have had tied to different materials, different uses, some of the different markets, and what may be required with regards to specifying sight glasses. So with that, what is a sight glass, John? Give us a little background on what it is and what it's used for.
Okay, very good question. As introduced already, I'm John Giordano, also with LJ Star, and hopefully we'll get you some insightful information here today. So a sight glass, you think about a window in a house, you could see out, you could see in. A sight glass is similar to that, but a little bit more technically involved, but it's used in process. So you have processing systems where you may not need to measure volume or have a gate that's opening and shutting, valving and all that, but you actually need to see your process. Well, what a sight glass does, it allows you to see your process. But, Scott, different than, opening a doorway or a manway, when you have a sight glass that's affixed, you don't have to stop your process. So you can see your process while it is, being cooked, batched, whatever you're doing with the particular process. And that's important, as we're going to talk about here. A lot of processes need to maintain temperature, need to maintain pressure, a lot of things going on, and to be able to see that while your process is in motion is very important to a lot of our customers.
Correct. And I think safety is a pretty important feature with regards to sight glasses. How does safety play into a maintenance or end user with regards to their applications and trying to visually observe what's happening inside?
Oh yeah, safety is enormous. It's paramount. If you think about it, there's a lot of different ways you can utilize a sight glass. It could be used inline in a piping system. It could also be used on a tank, and in most cases, it's going to be on a stainless steel tank. So if we're talking about safety, the weakest point of that tank vessel is probably going to be the sight glass. So if there's a pressure spike or a problem with temperature or something's not sealed correctly, that could be a very dangerous part of the vessel. But we're going to talk today about using the right type of sight glass to ensure your safety.
And definitely with regards to various types of sight glasses and styles, market and end user plays quite a bit of a role in determining what type of materials, what type of sight glasses may be utilized as far as what customers may be looking for, correct?
We kind of break our markets up here. We kind of list it out as industrial, which would be like your oil and gas, chemical plants, pulp and paper, then our pharma, life sciences type customers, and then food and beverage customers. The pharma and food and beverage are pretty similar because they're what we call sanitary. So a lot of the connection styles are going to be the same, but the differences are vast. The industrial tends to be a little bit more dangerous, might be a little more pressure involved or more caustic materials involved. And then when you get into food and beverage and pharma, same thing. You can have some really high pressure applications and all that, but you're going to need more certification as well too. So across the different industries, different certifications are needed. And that's where we come in, at LJ Star to help our customers find out, first of all, you mentioned safety. We have to make sure that we're suggesting the right equipment, the safest equipment for their application. But then B, it has to work. They have to be able to see the process the way they're expecting to see the process. And then C, what regulations are there, what specs, what specifications do we have to meet?
Perfect. Well, one of the things that we're going to try to get into a little bit more today is specification of sight glasses. And it sounds like with the different markets, there's quite a bit of design differences with regards to what we would need to design our equipment to meet, especially going from something like you said with pharmaceutical to an industrial application where they may have higher caustics, higher pressure compared to maybe the pharmaceutical or the food and beverage where they may not even be able to have glass in the process. So what we'll do is we'll go a little bit over some of the various components. We'll talk a little bit about the design criterias that go into how we produce some of our sight glasses and try and answer some of the more important questions that we may receive from some of our customers when they're trying to specify equipment. So what we'll start out with is, John, tell us a little bit about some of the components that are used, such as the materials that go into producing a complete sight glass unit.
And there's a lot of variations that can come across there, but typically In a sight glass assembly, you're going to have steel parts. So there's going to be a base to that. That'll be steel, and there's going to be a retainer or a cover that's going to be steel. And then sandwiched in between that, you're going to have your actual glass, your sight glass, whether it's a standard glass disc or getting into a more specialty glass like METAGLAS, which we'll talk about a little bit more. You're going to have that, but then you're also going to have some seals. You're going to have a seal gasket that's on the bottom of the sight glass that actually comes into contact with the process medium. So that's going to have to meet the specifications for temperature, chemical resistance, all of that. Then we have another gasket on top that's really more of a cushion gasket, so that when we're tightening that assembly together, we're not putting pressure on the glass from the metal cover that's on top of that. So those are your main components, and that's just the simplest start. It could go into many different variations from there. But the most important thing is looking at pressure and temperature. We have to know pressure and temperature, no matter what type or what assembly you're going to use. What's the pressure requirement? What's the temperature requirement? That helps us dictate, which type of glass or how thick glass, that we're going to need so that that system is going to work properly and also be safe.
Perfect. Now, just back to some of the market-specific needs. We talked a little bit about some of the components that are used, but a lot of those components can change based on the market-specific requirements. Like we mentioned earlier, glass may be required in pharmaceutical, but they may want something non-glass related, such as a polycarbonate or an acrylic for use. So as far as determining what is specifically needed for those individual markets, it's a lot of questions with our customers. We'd be looking at, as John mentioned, we want to find out what the operating temperatures are going to be, and we want to find out a little bit about the max pressure and the connection types and the material requirements. And a lot of that will be determined based on what some of the custom applications are. Is it a caustic? Is it something that has to meet a high temperature or a high pressure? Do they have special material requirements on, as John had mentioned, the metals or the glass or the gaskets? There's quite a bit that actually goes into that. And then which type of sight glass? Everyone uses the term sight glass as kind of a general term, but John, could you talk a little bit about the different types and styles that LJ Star has to offer as far as sight glasses?
There are many different types. A lot of people, when you say sight glass, a lot of people just assume it's a circular type of sight glass that's sitting, on the top or side of a tank. But I think I mentioned earlier, we also have sight glasses that are more of a flow sight glass. So if you have your piping, right, you could cut into that piping, and we have that style of sight glass that goes right into that piping and that allows you to see flow. We also have sight glasses that are used for level indication. There's a lot of sophisticated equipment out there for level indication and level detection, but you'd be surprised to see how many companies have very expensive level indication detection equipment on their tanks, but also want a sight glass, a physical sight glass on there as a backup in case that equipment isn't working properly. So as far as how you could attach a sight glass, there's a few different styles as well there too. We have styles that actually weld to the tank. So you actually cut a circle into the tank, you weld that retaining base or weld pad to the tank, and then then you can attach the rest of the assembly to that weld base. We have styles that go in food and beverage and pharma. A lot is called a sanitary connection. Kind of looks like this piece here. So there's a standard sanitary fitting throughout that industry that's used. We have sight glasses that'll mount right to that sanitary fitting. And we also have sight glasses that can be bolted to a traditional ANSI flange, whether that's a raised face flange or a flat face flange as well too.
Now, you had mentioned a little bit in that with regards to some of the connection styles. That seems to come up quite a bit in conversation with engineering firms and end users. And we tend to find that a lot of them are pretty standard, where we get the tri-clamp fittings, we get the bolt-on fittings. But do you ever run across any special fittings that may not be right off the shelf?
Yes, we definitely come into that. Probably in our direct business is probably more in the industrial market that happens. But we mentioned you have, basically your weld on, your bolt on, or your tri-clamp style, sanitary ferrule type style. But we've come across, many different types, and that's a thing that, we'd like to do, most standard work here, but we do have a certain level of customization that we could do. So we just work with our customer to see, exactly what they're trying to achieve and how we can fit that. A lot of times an engineer has something on paper and thinking it's going to be a good fit, but once they come to us, we have to massage that. We have to tweak that a little bit with what's, really going to work, what's really going to, make that process work for them. And again, we always have to look at the limitations, especially pressure and temperature limitations if we're going to design something custom.
Perfect. And we do see quite a bit of custom applications just because we are dealing with a world market now. And when we were talking about connection styles and connection sizes, we're starting to find that equipment is being brought in from overseas, out of Europe, and the sizing may not be the same as you would find here in the U.S. and vice versa, where a lot of U.S. manufacturers are now building equipment and they're shipping it to Europe or other countries around the world that are using different mounting systems, different sizes for their sight glasses. And I think that you've had quite a bit of luck with that, being able to customize and fit your customers' needs.
Yes, it's just another good point. Yeah, there's a few different ways to go about the sizing and measurements. So you've got, if everything's coming from Europe, usually it's going to be in the metric system. Anything here we're using English, but then there's DIN measurements as well too, which is again going to follow the metric. But the years that we've had, the experience that we've had, the different customers being fortunate enough to be involved throughout the world. I think we're pretty well versed at being able to set up our system to match whatever measurements that they're looking for theirs.
Correct. So let's try and break it down a little bit and go a little bit more in depth with regards to what we're looking for as we design a sight glass for an individual application. Can you kind of go over some of the items with regards to what we would need to have answered from our customers as far as type, material, so on and so forth? What are your thoughts on what may be required for us to be able to design and offer an actual sight glass for your application?
And we've touched on this before, and we'll probably touch on it many more times today. First and foremost, it is always pressure and temperature. What is the pressure? So we're looking at positive pressure that the sight glass is against, and we also have vacuum as well too. So you have negative pressure, but we have to know that pressure. We have to know the temperature because we have limitations, right? We have material limitations. So if we're looking at a standard, the glass that LJ Star uses the most is a borosilicate glass. Okay, there's also soda lime glass out there, a couple different types of glass out there, but they all have their limitations. So if we're looking at a soda lime glass, which we don't really use as much, your high-end temperature is right around 300 degrees Fahrenheit, 302 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's beyond that, you can't specify that glass for that process because the glass is going to start to soften a little bit. It's going to weaken. So if it's rated at 50 psi, it's not going to be able to maintain 50 psi because it starts to soften and weaken, right? So borosilicate glass, that gets us a little bit of a higher temperature. It gets us up to 536 degrees Fahrenheit. We can actually go a little higher depending on other situations, but that's the typical stopping point for borosilicate. And then looking at just borosilicate and soda lime themselves in a comparison, soda lime has some chemical resistance, decent chemical resistance, but borosilicate has a much higher chemical resistance. It also has it's also a lot less susceptible to temperature swings. So its thermal coefficient of expansion is less severe than soda lime. And another reason why we tend to use the borosilicate more than soda lime here at LJ Star. But even getting beyond that application where you still need a sight glass, you want to be able to see in, but you've got a system, that's, let's say it's dangerous or it's susceptible to pressure spikes or personnel that doesn't really do the safety check the way they're supposed to when they're taking things apart and cleaning. We could take that borosilicate glass and really change that. We have a product called METAGLAS where we actually fuse a metal ring. We fuse the glass to this metal ring here. So this is the strongest type of safety glass that we recommend. So we just have to look at the process of pressure, temperature, but then beyond that, we have to look at the process medium, right? What is it up against? What is that process? And then is just as important as the cleaning process as well too. Is this going to be up against steam or high pressure steam or very, very strong caustics? In most cases, it's going to be up against all of that. So we need to, get a full understanding from the customer what that process is going to go through, A through Z, excuse me, so we can specify the right type of sight glass that's going to keep them, be able to see, but more importantly, keep it safe.
And something that comes up quite a bit when our customers reach out to us is we get a lot of questions with regards to operating and max. A lot of times on specifications when they come in, we'll see a customer tell us that the operating temperature and the operating pressure is to a certain degree, and they won't necessarily tell us what their max is. So one of the keys that we need to know is, what is that max operating temp and pressure? It's come up quite a bit in the past where we may be right on the edge to what a material, as John just covered, may be able to handle, and that suits their operating just fine, but we tend to find that the max may exceed those operating conditions, and we may need to completely change a sight glass design or offer different materials when that arises. So with regards to the types, as we kind of work our way through, once we determine what the connection type is, what the operating temperature and the max pressure may be, as you kind of alluded to with some of the different types of glass, what are all the different types of glass materials that LJ Star has to offer their customers?
Okay. Yeah, we do. I know we mentioned before, we talked about the soda lime and the borosilicate glass, and we have METAGLAS. We do offer the soda lime. Some applications it's usually a cost point. It's a little bit lower cost, so we can offer soda lime glass to customers if they need that.
And real quick, the soda lime is, for people that may not know, is basically the glass that's used every day with car windshields and windows in your home. And
Correct. It's the most common. That's for sure. It's the most common glass, and it's used still pretty well throughout our industry. But as far as in other industries, yes, it's a very common form of glass. And then then we have the borosilicate glass. There's a trade name Pyrex. A lot of people recognize Pyrex with borosilicate. That's what it is. It's borosilicate. And you may have seen videos of cookware, where they take a hot piece of cookware and they actually put it on a cool counter or whatever the case. If that's made of the traditional soda lime glass, that's when that cookware just explodes right in front of you. Getting into the borosilicate, where I mentioned it's not as sensitive to temperature swings, you could take that hot Pyrex dish, which is borosilicate, and you could take it out of the hot oven and put it onto a cool counter, and it's not going to explode. Those are probably the two most common in just glass itself, but also is very common is our fused glass. Now, our METAGLAS product can be done with soda lime as well, but for us, 90+% of the time it's going to be with borosilicate glass, and we do that just because it's a more superior product. We know it can handle chemicals better. It can handle the temperature swings better. Has even a little bit better clarity if it's at a granular level, but it's just a superior glass, and that's a glass we tend to choose.
And with regards to the Pyrex, as John had mentioned, there is a little bit of confusion that we get into with the borosilicate and the Pyrex. They use a lot of old terminology, such as Pyrex when it's coming in. It's still valid, but I believe the name has actually been purchased. So if you're buying Pyrex in Europe, for example, you're getting borosilicate glass, as John mentioned. But if you're buying Pyrex here in the United States, I believe that's the way it goes, you're actually getting a soda lime or a lower grade. So it's gotten very confusing with regards to some of the terminology that we see rolling in, or the trade names tied to the different types of glass, as well as some very low-grade glasses coming in from overseas that you may find coming in from China, from India, that don't necessarily meet some of the more stringent code requirements of the type of glass that we actually use here at LJ Star. So those are definitely some things to keep in mind. Now, how about some specialty glass above and beyond the soda lime and the borosilicate glass that we may get into with higher temperature applications and caustics?
Good point. I like to think I know everything, but I forgot about mentioning that. Thank you. Yes, so we talked about the top end temperature. So if we're looking at a typical borosilicate glass, we're limited to 536 degrees Fahrenheit. We could go beyond that when we put it into our METAGLAS product here, where it's fused. This ring here, this stainless steel ring, our standard construction it's a 2205 duplex stainless steel. And this is also at 536 degrees Fahrenheit. If you need to go just a little bit above that, we can make this ring out of Hastelloy. And the Hastelloy allows us to take that temperature to 572 degrees Fahrenheit. So we could go a little bit further than that with the borosilicate. But if we even need to go beyond that, then we're going to go to a quartz glass. We're going to go to quartz, which we're easily at 1,000 degrees. The thing that gets difficult with the quartz really isn't the glass. Then we're looking at the seals, the elastomers. We've got to look at the limitations of those gaskets that we're putting in there. And that's something that we see a lot. You're talking to design engineers, and you just look at the glass temperature, and they think we're set, and we're like, well, wait a minute, what type of seal are we going to use here? A lot of people tend to leave that out.
Well, and even in some cases, you're looking at the body materials, such as the different stainless steels that are used. Right. And that can go both for lower temperatures and higher temperatures, to where that may cause issues.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's nice to know that we've had a lot of years of experience with that, but we do have a wide range of solutions. So we can't just say we are limited at 536 degrees F with the borosilicate glass. We've got a few tricks up our sleeve that we could do. Again, getting into the quartz, it's a little more brittle glass, so we have to be a little more careful on how we put that assembly together. But we could go well beyond that 536 degree limitation. And just one real quick thing. Sorry, we were talking about types. I have it right in front of me. As far as mounting, we also have a threaded style sight glass as well too. So I mentioned weld-on style, bolt-on style, a sterile type MetaClamp style, and we also have threaded style sight glasses as well too.
And there are all kinds of different styles that may come up that may have trade names, be created by specific companies, that in many cases we can even match or fit up to. So it's really quite endless, to be honest, with so many of the different styles of connection. These are just the most standard that we've come across over the years, but there are ones out there that we're still learning a little bit about and still being able to design for. So back to the glass. What about sapphire? I do see sapphire come up quite a bit. I know it's got the higher temperature capabilities, but what else can it do?
Well, there's a lot with sapphire. Actually, I'm gonna probably throw this one back at you because this one's a little more in your field that you deal with this more. It is, from what I know, is it's chemically inert. So when you're getting into a very, very caustic or a situation where the glass is under constant strong chemical attack, I know we've gone into that, but I'm gonna throw that one back at you and let you talk a little bit about the sapphire.
Yeah, the sapphire is an interesting one. We have been using it quite a bit in the more recent times, just because of its capabilities with regards to chemical attack. That seems to be where we've been using it the most, as well as higher temperatures. But it is a little bit difficult to use just from a costing standpoint. It is significantly more expensive than the other types of glass. So we've come up with creative ways to take advantage of using sapphire as, say, a shield or a way to protect our standard glass if the temperatures allow for it. And in some cases, we just have customers that have high temperature and high caustic applications where we'll use a whole piece of sapphire. The upside definitely is the longevity of the sapphire. We have a lot of customers that are reusing it because it is a shield and not the standard glass. So it's been a very neat product that's been able to overcome quite a few applications that our customers have had difficulties with. A couple more types of glass that don't get associated necessarily with glass, but would be, say, the polycarbonates and acrylics as well. Where do you tend to see those used, John?
Probably the most, the industry where we see that the most would be the food and beverage industry. You have certain plants that have a no glass policy. So that, depending on, whether it's borosilicate, whether it's soda lime, even a fused glass, but that's kind of another story too. We've been able to use the fused glass in plants with a no glass policy because it's a different style. But you're going to see that in food and beverage. And again, there's certain areas where you just have to use that, but there's a lot of disadvantages there. That type of the acrylic polycarbonate can etch very easily. It becomes cloudy very quickly. Can't really handle. It can handle pressure if we go really thick on it, but it can't really get high into the temperatures. And they don't have like that broad spectrum of safety. Whereas with borosilicate, you're good with chemicals, you're good with temperature, you're good with pressure, you're good with caustics, you're good with acids, you're good with alcohols. When you get into the acrylics and the polycarbonates, there's always going to be a trade-off. One's going to be good with alcohol, one's going to be good with caustics. It's not not one of those non-glass type materials can cover the full spectrum. So there's definitely limitations. But, if a customer has an application where that's what they need, we have experience with that as well, and we could help them out with that situation.
And again, it sounds like most of that is going to be tied to the questions that we would ask at the start of the process. What are you going to be installing the sight glass on? What are the temperatures? What are the pressures? And then basically we would determine whether or not the poly, the acrylic, and there's so many different materials that are clear that are being used now that can meet FDA requirements, or food and beverage, or even in some applications pharmaceutical, where they've used different acrylic and polycarbonate based materials. So it's definitely on the table. It definitely fills a need, as John had mentioned, with the food and beverage. I know that in those specific markets, they are very, very concerned about having glass breakage into their overall process, and there are materials that are safe to be consumed if they were to ever break off, and we've had experience with that as well. So you were talking a little bit about some of these specialty applications. So what are some of the special factors that have to be considered beyond and taking into account the design for safety when we're dealing with some of our customers?
Well, okay, yeah, safety, again, is obviously number one. So we always talk about pressure and temperature, but we also have to look at, again, what is the cleaning process going to be? What's that wash down going to look like? Whether it's a steam environment, whether it's a highly caustic environment, highly acidic environment. Food and beverage is highly regulated, but the pharma is going to be even a step above that. I'm a food and beverage guy. I know that market pretty well, and the pharma probably a little more. Scott's more into the industrial side, so there's a lot of regulations with all of them. And one thing here, with at LJ Star, when you partner with us, we get that information, but it's not just talk. Any specification that you need to meet, we're going to provide you the documentation for that. This product here, our METAGLAS product, is used a lot in the pharmaceutical industry. It's used a lot in the food and beverage industry, chemical as well too. And when you get this, you're going to get a full document package that tells you all the materials that are involved into this very, very special sight glass. Unfortunately, we're not the only game out there. There's other players in the industry, and some of them tend to use tricky wording in describing exactly what's into their, built into their sight glass. Where, with this, we're going to tell you exactly what that steel ring is made of, which is in most cases duplex 2205, exactly what type of glass that is, which in most cases is going to be borosilicate. You're going to get full documentation and certification of exactly what comes with each and every METAGLAS piece that you order. So specifications are enormous. Sometimes it's, the industry, they're not very concerned with it. Other times they're extremely concerned with it, and they can't move forward without their full MTR packages and full traceability.
And the best thing we can say to our customers is to basically ask questions. Whoever you're buying equipment from, they should be able to satisfy you with whatever documentation may be required. They should be able to meet the actual code requirements that they may have. Something that's come up quite a bit lately is using code-based materials, especially ASME code materials for weld pads. We get a lot of questions on that. People will possibly use or think that they're quoting and using material that meets ASME, but it doesn't actually fall under the rules and regulations that ASME puts forth. So it's one thing that's been coming up a lot with our customers, with their requests and us trying to meet those needs. Documentation seems to be just a big one. When we're getting into design and safety, we want to know the process fluids. Like John said, we want to know the temperature, we want to know the pressure, we want to know what those maxes are, but a lot that needs to be taken into account is how it's being installed, where it's being located. We have some applications that are outside, some are inside, so the temperature outside at any given time of year may be higher than what they're anticipating because it may be out in Arizona and it's extremely hot, the sun's on it, and those type of things need to be taken into account. Design, obviously we've talked a lot about design, what goes into the design. Again, we would we would say customers should be asking a lot of questions. Normally when we get a request with, I need an 8-inch sight glass and it's going on a bolt-on. And that's normally, for the most part, that's what we'll see. Right. And we've got to come back with a significant amount of questions. And in some cases, our customer can answer it. In some cases, they can't. But we have to be absolutely sure as to what the customer is looking for to make sure that we give them what is going to work for their application. And as John mentioned, with regards to the safety, we love the METAGLAS safety product because many customers actually accept the METAGLAS as a safety sight glass. They feel safer putting it in front of their customers' faces because they're essentially looking through the glass into the application. And we want to make sure that that product is actually going to meet all the requirements so there is no catastrophic failure during process. With regards to some of the materials, something else that does come up quite a bit is our gasketing. We do run into that quite a bit because there are so many different materials with regards to gaskets, and we get a lot of requests for Teflon, for example, and there are so many different types that can fall under Teflon. But can you talk just a little bit, John, about some of the different materials that we're using at LJ Star as kind of our standards, and then maybe what some of our options are?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, as you said, the Teflon and that family of products are used a ton. A lot of our standard sight glasses will come with just a straight Teflon material, or we could get into the Guylon materials. We use a lot of Guylon 3504. We use silicone. We use EPDM a lot. Some even use Buna. Buna is still used a lot as well too. So there's a lot. It just depends. There may be the process is already specified out, all the seals and the rest of the process are that. Those are the easy ones. If someone doesn't know, we just say, hey, well, what's going on the rest of that skid, or what's on the rest of that system, and we get to find that out. But it just depends on what are they looking. Do they need something that is a little more elastic, has a little more memory? Do they need something that's going to be under constant chemical attack? And then getting into that, getting into maybe higher temperatures, a higher chemical, we could get into the exotic type materials like the CalRes and ChemRes materials and all of that, which can handle quite a bit. But there's a price point with those as well too. We've actually seen the CalRes gasket come in priced as much or even higher than the whole sight glass assembly. But yeah, we do have a full range of gaskets that we can offer. And again, it's the conversation back and forth. It's I'm a little bit older. I like to talk on the phone, but that's where nowadays where the emails really do come in, because you get to go back and make sure that everything's being covered. Because again, very, very important points, and pretty much whatever they're going to need for their process, we're going to be able to provide. And if it's something that we haven't even heard of before, we look into that as well too. And if it's something that can be acquired in a sheet material and it has the right memory and all that, we could get the gaskets formed for them as well too. So again, most of our work is going to be what we stock normally on the shelf, but there's a certain amount of customization that goes into it, and we could do that with the gasketing as well.
And gaskets are a wetted component, so what we tend to run into is maybe in an industrial application, we don't need to have certificates of compliance with regards to the gasket. But then when we get into food and beverage, there may be FDA code requirements. There may be other code requirements that are needed for any of the pharmaceutical materials. And the nice thing is that we have the capability to offer documentation for any of the materials that may be required. But we are going to need to know when we're designing up front. We run into this quite a bit with regards to, we receive an order, we give out a quote and it wasn't brought up, and we quote a standard gasket material and it doesn't come with certificates because it's just a standard material and price is important. And so one of the things I would stress is to try to figure out what you're going to need in advance of the job, and let us know what certificates are required or what documentation is required. And that goes for everything. That goes with our whatever metals we may be using for the body. That goes for the glass. We have some customers that have to use a DIN spec glass. They want the documentation. They feel safer using that glass. Same with the METAGLAS product. And then even so far as bolting or other possibly third-party testing. What's some of the testing that you've come across, John, that may have been included with some of the sight glasses you've sold over the years?
What I see is like a hydro test, getting the pressure on the unit, testing with water, actually testing it here in the shop and seeing that it's being passed. Again, sometimes we have to have a third party inspector in there as well. But again, this is fun. I get to toss the hot potato back to Scott because this is more his alley. You've gone through. I don't even understand the stuff that you cover, to be honest.
We do have quite a bit of testing, and it all depends on the markets that the sight glasses are going into. We've done everything from dye pen to PMI to hardness, and it comes up more and more today, basically, because the customer wants to know where the material is coming from. You may have an investment cast unit, but it may be a sand casting. It may be an investment cast unit. It just kind of depends on the manufacturer, and customers want to know today where the material is coming from. There's within certain jobs that we have, there may be markets to where they may not be able to receive goods or castings from. Luckily, ours are all produced here in the U.S., so we don't run into too many of those issues. But there are materials that we may be getting out of Asia. There may be some that we're getting out of South America. It just depends on what we're producing for the end user, and it depends on what their requirements are. And the nice thing is we do have various labs that we work with that can do third-party testing. Our customers are more than welcome to send in inspectors and witness the process. As John had mentioned, hydro testing here on site is something that some of our customers will send inspectors out to witness. Review of documentation here at the facility is another big one. We have been seeing that more and more as some of these projects get a little bit more complex, that the applications get a little bit more complex. So it's definitely something that we can handle as a company and make sure that we meet all of our customers' requirements.
Agreed. And again, like you've mentioned before, it's just the more of that we could capture, preferably all of that, but more of that we could capture up front, then we know, because there's a lot that goes into that. I mean, price is always king. Everyone wants to know the price, but we need to know lead time as well too. That may be an issue with lead time. We've got to arrange to have that third party inspector come in. Well, what's his schedule look like? And what's the date timeline on this equipment as well too. So again, the more information we can know from the beginning, the better. And like you were talking about too, with the specifications and certifications, chemical, is at one level, then you've got food at one level, then you've got, pharma at a level above that. There's a lot of different things, just a customer will call in and say, I need an FDA gasket for this. Well, FDA, is it a CFR 21? Is it a food grade FDA or is it a pharma, USP Class 6 FDA? There's all of that we need to find out. And luckily, our staff is pretty well versed and trained to know to ask those questions, but they're very important questions. When you get, when we're dealing with the OEM tank fabricators, they may order a sight glass from us, but that sight glass may not get commissioned for 8 months after that. So they're sitting on this thinking they have the correct material, the correct gaskets, glass, whatever it may be, and it doesn't get commissioned for another 8 months. Now they find out they don't have the certification that they really needed because it wasn't communicated to us, and trying to trace that all back is quite challenging when it's something that we could have handled right up front.
And it does get interesting having a fabricator thrown in the middle. Not that they don't try their best, but we do run into issues where the fabricator may not have realized that certain documentation was required. The nice thing is that most of the units that we're shipping out are hydro tested anyway, so we do document that. A lot of our materials do come with certificates, whether the customer requires them or not. So I would say in at least 80 to 90% of cases where customers come back after the fact, we've been able to supply them with the required documentation, even though they didn't know what they needed up front. So that's definitely something that I think we've done a very nice job with. We can't get it right every time, I will admit. I mean, if it hasn't been brought to our attention,
it's difficult.
We've had to go back after the fact and do testing. I mean, we've had customers ship product back to us, send it out to have all the testing, rebuild, retest, ship back out, and we get it done, and we will bend over to make sure that we get what you need. But definitely something to keep in mind.
Agreed.
Now, with regards to the sight glasses, one of the funny questions I get from a lot of people is basically, how am I going to see inside the tank? I've got one sight glass, but I don't have any way, it's quite dark in there. So how do you address that?
And I mean, obviously, we're talking about sight glasses here, but if you're trying to see inside a house with no lights on, you're not going to be able to see it. So, luckily, we can provide some help in there as well too. We do offer a wide variety of process lighting, sight glass tank type lighting that is specifically made for a process system. So it's going to be IP65, meaning it's watertight. It's also dust tight. We could even provide stuff for an explosion proof environment as well too. So we have a very wide array of lights that we can offer, even cameras to go along with that as well too. You have certain instances where it's a little too dangerous to get to the top of that tank, or it needs to be monitored, 24/7. We can provide a camera with that. But yeah, lighting is extremely important. Then again, going back to the setup, we need to know what type of setup is it. If you've only got one area, okay, we've got one area where we're going to look through, but we also need to provide light through that as well too. Well, you'd be surprised on requests that come through from engineers that want a light that's actually bigger than the opening that they're trying to look through. So we have to go through all that and find out, okay, do you have a separate port that you're going to look through and a separate port we're going to light through? That's very easy. If not, if it's a single port, we can still do that. We just need to know that. We need to know the specifics, and we can help them with that. But yeah, you could have the best, shiniest, clearest sight glass in the world. If it's dark in the tank, you're not going to see too much.
And we do have, the nice thing is we do have a significant amount, like John said, of different mounting styles that we can use with our lights. We have ones that some customers will actually ask us if it's part of the light, because it comes looking so well put together that it looks like one single piece, instead of, say, a METAGLAS sight glass that's made to fit right up inside one of our LED light fixtures and tri-clamp right to a tank. Mm-hmm. So we are, with all of our different products, able to satisfy all the different mounting requirements, from bolt-ons to tri-clamp fittings to even threaded styles we've had tied to our lighting line. And the other nice thing is, as John had mentioned, everything is moving towards the future. So we've been able to revamp our entire lighting line with LEDs and kind of stay ahead of the curve. We've been able to, as John had mentioned, meet the UL and ETL requirements on a handful of our fixtures, as well as meeting various EX ratings. We can also satisfy some of the European requirements as well with the ATEX. So I think at this point, as I had mentioned, with a worldwide market, being able to sell to manufacturers that are shipping into Europe, European manufacturers shipping into the US, we should be able to satisfy most of the needs, as well as any of the voltage requirements that may come up. And we do get quite a bit of questions with regards to which voltage should we be using, which style should we be using. One other thing I think our sales staff does a phenomenal job of is dictating what you may need as far as the sight glass and the lighting, again, based on the questions that we would ask and that we've kind of presented here today. And then try and offer the best lighting solution as well as sight glass for that application. And as John had mentioned, we get a lot of applications where they'll ask for a specific sight glass and they want the light, but they don't quite understand how the two interact with one another, and that there may be required another sight port on the tank, or we can adjust the sight port so we can make it a little bit larger to accommodate both a view and a light through the same port. So that's really more or less what we're here for, is to answer questions and offer the best solutions with regards to our products. I'm getting towards the end here, John. I mean, what do you think we're missing anything, or?
It's funny, in the beginning you mentioned, so what is a sight glass? And it's very simple and it's very complicated at the same time, right? It's basically a way to view inside your process without having to stop your process, without having to open anything up. So you do not lose pressure, you do not lose temperature. That's, kind of a simple way of talking about it. But then again, like you said, okay, great. Well, how are we going to mount that sight glass? Well, there's many different styles. We can weld it to the tank. We can have an MPT type threading, even different type of threading. We could have it to where it goes to a tri-clamp type fitting to the tank as well too, or bolt-on style to the tank, and probably other things beyond that we're going to come across. But then we have to look at pressure and temperature. Pressure and temperature, what kind of certification does it need? So there's a lot of factors that go into it. And lastly, like you said, I know we're talking sight glass, but you can't talk sight glass without lighting. The lighting that goes along with it. I mean, I have come across certain plants, that are really well lit, and they got a pretty, nice size, say, manway or sight glass where they're actually okay. But, most cases, if you're really wanting to see that process, see what's going on in there, a lot of, in the food and beverage especially, a lot of what they're looking for is wash down, right, between batches. We do a lot with the breweries, so they're anyone who knows beer, you don't mix your sours and your IPAs. We're not doing that. That's in a whole different plant. But one vessel is going to see many different types of beer. So wash down, they need to know that wash down is complete. But you're not going to do that without a tank light. So you have to have a tank light on there, but you also have to have a proper sight glass to be able to see that. So you look through, hey, that process is complete. We could go on to the next batch. So again, a sight glass, it's simple, but it's also complicated, and it's just a very, very integral part of a system.
And that does kind of go back to, we get asked quite a bit, why do we need a sight glass? And it's interesting because customers that question us and then install a sight glass later end up finding out things that they were missing. As John had mentioned, maybe the washdown didn't completely clear the tank of the process before the next batch comes through and impacts the flavor, impacts the color, impacts whatever it might be. Same in pharmaceutical, where they may not be getting a proper washdown because one of the spray balls may be blocked and not getting a particular area of a tank. I mean, it's great when they go through the validation of the tanks and they verify that, everything is working properly, but after cycles upon cycles upon cycles, that equipment doesn't necessarily always work properly. So it's definitely something that we like to recommend to customers to say, hey, you've got to be able to see inside these processes that you have on site just to verify that they're working properly, because it does impact the overall product, the end product. And we've seen it time and time again where they can't quite understand what's happening because they don't have something to see inside that process. As well as it comes up quite a bit. It's surprising how much goes into starting up a plant to where they may have lost power, they may have had a shutdown, they may have had an application where they've had to come in and replace equipment and then start the equipment back up. That's where I tend to see a lot of sight glasses, because they have to make sure that they have flow from all their different systems, because if they don't, it can be catastrophic to some of the processes at these plants. So it's definitely something that we recommend, and again, we understand that customers are concerned about safety. They're concerned about putting their employees in front of these applications, and as John mentioned earlier, in many applications, the sight glass may be considered the weak point. So it's something that we want to make sure is able to withstand just about anything that you throw at it, and we want to make sure that it is not the weak point in the actual process. So we're designing highly engineered sight glasses and components, and trying to make sure our customers understand that they're completely safe, they should be used, and are here to answer any questions that our customers may actually have with regards to the sight glasses. And we do get a lot of questions from our customers. When we're at events, when we're traveling, when we're meeting with them on site. It's, as John mentioned, it's a very simple product, but it's a very complex product with regards to what you get at the end of the process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also I know you kind of ran through that as well, like the different mounting styles. But again, what we have talked about there, where, it could be a situation where there's not a lot of reaction from cleaning and agents and all that, or pressure or temperature, to where there's a mid-level to where there's a high level. And that's where, our experts here fit in, whether you can get away with soda lime glass, or whether you need to step up to the borosilicate glass, or if you've got a situation where we need to have the strongest safety sight glass out here, the METAGLAS product, our conversation, will help you determine what you're going to need to be able to see your process, but even more importantly, keep your people safe as well too. You mentioned that before, the catastrophic failure. And another thing, just wanted to piggyback, you were talking about washdown cycles, lost product. If you think about a pharmaceutical environment, one batch could be worth, I don't know, hundred thousands or even millions of dollars. So if that tank isn't washed out properly and you can't see that it's washed out properly, that could be a very, very big loss of revenue, where we could have provided equipment at a fraction of that cost to help them with that.
Yeah. Now, just to finish up today, certainly if you happen to have if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to contact any one of the LJ Star sales team, inside or outside. We also have distributors and reps throughout the United States, so we're more than happy to take your call and answer any questions that may come up. But I think that's just about it, John. We appreciate you guys tuning in and learning a little bit more about sight glasses and what LJ Star has to offer. Thanks.